Oh, hello everybody, and welcome to Podcast 451, where we're doing our werewolf interview special. Okay, I can't keep doing that. That was awful. So I'm here with Chris Fox. Yay.
Hey, audience, nice to meet you guys.
And I realized that I can't move my mouse with two gloved hands. So apologies for any purists out there that are upset that I only had one werewolf glove on. So,
Half a werewolf is better than none.
so I'm super stoked to have you on here because I just want to kind of geek out on some Wolfie stuff. And oh man, I didn't even get everything. I had all of this fun stuff to have come out and say hello to you. Oh,
That's awesome.
and that's one of my favorites. This is from a 1986 Imperial toy line. It was one of my all-time favorites.
Oh, wow, you're a collector. Okay.
This was from Burger King in the late 90s.
Now, that one I remember.
Yeah, and he would jump out of a little cellar, and they
Yep.
had those cool glow-in-the-dark stickers. This thing, I don't know where it came from or what it is. I got it at a yard sale in someone's shoebox.
That's
So
by far my favorite.
yeah, it's pretty cool. And then I got my little Funko guy over there. That's the newest addition to my wolf collection here. But yeah, so I am a huge Lon Chaney fan and dig all the old Universal werewolf movies and the Oliver Reed Hammer movies and just werewolf lore in general. So thrill me right now, sir, and tell me how you got into werewolves and how you started writing books about them.
Sure thing. So, when I was a little kid, like you, I saw Lon Chaney movies, and back then, maybe because they were black and white, they just terrified me. The idea that you
Mm.
could have somebody who looked completely normal and totally blended in, but all of a sudden they could wolf out and tear you apart was, terrifying to my 6-year-old self. And so I think from that age on, I was kind of fascinated by werewolves. And as I grew up, I digested every movie that came out. I found every book that I could read about it. Along came Stephen King's Silver Bullet, and that really, really cemented it for me. I love that movie. The whole scene with the kid in the wheelchair, it's got a lawnmower engine attached to it. He's trying to get away from the werewolf. I mean, that was, a formative moment for me as a kid. And I think one of the moments that made me decide I wanted to be a writer. So by the time I was in seventh grade, I was starting to write short stories, and one of my very first short stories was about a werewolf. And my mom still has it to this day and loves to trot it out whenever we have company over, because in the story, mom got left behind. Mom didn't make it. So that's one of my mom's favorite stories.
Oh, that's awesome. It's a
And it
real
still stayed
tearjerker.
with me. Are you familiar with role-playing games?
Yeah,
Okay, yeah. So when Werewolf came out, so there's
yeah,
a line of role-playing games by, for those that don't know, by a company called White Wolf. They started out with Vampire the Masquerade, and then they came out with
yeah.
Werewolf the Apocalypse. Well, I was a huge Werewolf the Apocalypse fan. It was my favorite out of all the games that they released, and I absolutely loved it. And so I worked a little bit of that in when I actually started writing my own werewolf novels because I love the lore that they put together, that werewolves didn't have to necessarily just be evil. They were still bestial, but they could also sort of be guardians, and I kind of capitalized on that.
Yeah. Do you remember there was a PC game called Vampire Masquerade Bloodlines?
I do.
Like I ended up writing I started a series based off the kind of world that they put together in that, which is all the different clans like in LA, like just being like organized crime. It was
That's
just so
awesome.
great.
Yeah, I loved the universe they put together.
Yeah, and that's White Wolf, right? That did
Yes,
both of
that's White
those.
Wolf.
Yeah, yeah, man, those were great. Um, so then you went from that into doing what you do now, but then you started actually writing the werewolf book, and how did that come about?
So what really prompted me to write it was seeing Twilight and realizing that the way our society sees vampires and werewolves was changing, and that they were no longer scary. It was no longer what you expected from somebody like Anne Rice or Lon Chaney. It was now, they were cuddly for werewolves and they were sparkly for vampires. And I wanted to return to scariness, but I also wanted to do a different take on it and wanted them to be a little bit more like what I had seen in Werewolf the Apocalypse. So I started doing a ton of research, and it took me probably 4 years to do all of it, everything from helioseismology to figure out how the light of the moon would get them to change to genetics. I mean, how could a werewolf actually wolf out? And so I took a very scientific approach to the whole thing. And I came up with this ancient civilization that I decided that it existed before ours. There's quite a bit of evidence in the world about it. So I decided to fill in the gaps. I mean, everybody's heard the legends of Atlantis, but what a lot of people don't know is some of the more common monuments in the world, like the Sphinx, we don't know as much about them as we think we do. So the Sphinx, we assume, was built about 5,000 years ago by a guy named Pharaoh Khafre. But the thing is, Pharaoh Khafre never took credit for it, and pharaohs loved to claim credit for anything they built. And there's also what appear to be thousands of years of water erosion to the Sphinx. And we don't really know what caused that, but what we do know is it was most likely rain. And there hasn't been rainfall in Egypt for another 10,000 years before the pyramid, so back in the last ice age. So my thought was, whoever built the Sphinx came from some sort of advanced culture, and I sort of took that and ran with it and decided that they were advanced enough that they used genetic manipulation to create werewolves. So my werewolves hail from a much earlier time, and now they're returning.
That is sick, man. That is some good thinking right there. That's awesome. In fact, Zoe, who does the show with me, she started reading your book, and the first few pages, she was just like, "Oh!" She was just blown away. She's like, "Oh my gosh!" She's like, "You're not gonna believe what just happened." But she's a huge werewolf stickler. She's very that's her favorite monster kind of thing, and she's super particular with her werewolf films and stuff like that and books and but she's already totally loving it. So hopefully I'll get on that soon. And again, I never remember to turn my phone off. I'm awful.
Yeah, I'm bad about that too.
And super professional. So here we go. So in No Such Thing as Werewolves, who is the protagonist of your story?
So I have several. So it's a very kind of world-sweeping plot, and there are two factions. You've got this corporation, and they know that this pyramid is returning, and it's sort of mysterious how and why they know about this. They have a team waiting when this pyramid bursts up out of the ground, and a werewolf comes out of the pyramid and slaughters, half the team, and then escapes. And they started investigating the pyramid, trying to find out where the werewolves come from and learn more about them. So our main protagonist is a guy named Blair, and he's one of the scientists on this team. But there are others as well that are introduced through the story. There is a divide between male and female werewolves. So they both have different abilities. Females are larger and stronger, and males have the ability to do something called shaping, which I guess you might think of sort of like psychic powers. That allow them to, blur very fast, read minds, that sort of thing. And so you've got a female protagonist and a male protagonist. The female protagonist is Liz, the male protagonist is Blair, and then I guess who you might call the antagonist is one of the guys that works for the corporation, a soldier by the name of Commander Jordan.
So, let me see how to word this correctly. So, the antagonist in your story isn't necessarily the werewolves themselves. It's the corporation, someone in the corporation.
From both perspectives. So when you're reading the chapters about the guy who works for the corporation, his big concern is werewolves are spreading like a plague. So what'll happen is werewolves will slaughter people, and some of those people rise from the dead as werewolves. And so it's spreading like a plague across South America and working its way into Central America, and this corporation's just trying to stop it. So they consider themselves to be the good guys. But a couple of your characters are werewolves, and you start learning why this is happening, and there's a damn good reason why the werewolves are spreading so quickly. And so the corporation doesn't know what this reason is, so they're trying to stop them, but the werewolves themselves realize we've got to create more champions because something way worse than us is coming.
when you were putting together your characters, what problems did you have, let's say, when you were putting your main cast together, if you had any at all?
I did. The first pass of the novel, so I did a draft and then I sent it out to alpha readers, and they came back with a lot of great feedback. Is that none of my characters had any flaws? They all got along well all the time, so they would, get together and everybody, nobody had any conflict and everybody liked each other, and there were some cool events going on in the background, but these characters were very two-dimensional as a result. And so I made some pretty striking changes that I think made them, have a little bit more depth. So one of the characters, Liz, I added the fact that she was fleeing from North America, so she went down to South America so she could find a shaman and try ayahuasca, and was trying to get away from a boyfriend she had back in the States. So, I added a lot more to her backstory and made her kind of a richer character as a result.
So, what would you recommend authors look for to see if their characters are very one-dimensional?
The first thing I would look for is conflict. So, are there arguments between characters? Because in real life, especially in stressful situations, you're going to have conflict. Not everybody's going to get along, especially if they've just met. So, if you find that the conversation is very cordial between them, that's one big red flag. Something else that you can look for is if your characters don't have enough flaws. And I'm not talking necessarily alcoholism or one of the tropes that we generally see. If there aren't problems in their life, then you maybe are going to have some issues making that a convincing character. So, for example, Blair, my main character, he's an archaeologist and he's there for a good reason, but he doesn't have the same background as a lot of the other scientists. So he's not a full doctor. He teaches, stone slackers at a JC and doesn't make very much money and has a broken down car. So you have to make them sympathetic so that the reader can look at this person and sort of root for them.
Yeah. That's some good stuff, dude. The characters that you put in here, let's say, which one of these was the easiest for you to write?
That would be Ahiga. So Ahiga is a werewolf that's in the pyramid, and his whole job when he wakes up is to wake the mother. She's the progenitor of the werewolves. And Ahiga decides that before he does that, he wants to go to the surface and take a look around. It's a whole new world. He's been trapped in this pyramid for over 10,000 years. He wants to know how the world has changed. And so he comes up to the surface and gets ambushed by this corporation and ends up having to flee. So he's not able to wake the mother. And he's sort of trapped in our world trying to learn what we're all about. And as a character, he was both really fun to write and also really easy. He just came naturally to me.
Do you find writing characters who are in constant discovery about things is a lot easier than ones that are kind of you're peeling layers away to try to find out what makes them tick and stuff?
I do. I think that, in my case at least, I have to get inside the head of the character. I have to sort of know what makes them tick, and that comes through discovery. So I'll plot everything ahead of time. I'll start with the ending and I'll plot backwards to the beginning of the book that I'm going to write. But the characters are exactly the opposite. I'll be writing a character through these scenes and I sort of know what's going to happen in the chapter, but the character will totally surprise me as I begin to figure out who they are. And that's probably the thing I most enjoy about writing.
Isn't that just the neatest crap in the world, man? When they just like...
you'll have these great characters that maybe it was just a waitress at a restaurant you never intended to be anything more than a 2-page aside, and all of a sudden you've got your next main character.
Definitely, that's so much fun, man. Who was the hardest character for you to write and why?
Who is hardest character for me to write? I would say the director. So I have a character in this book that is referred to by his title. He's so powerful and so scary that no one is willing to even say his name. And I'm kind of a nice guy, so I had a hard time making him be a dick, and getting in his head and sort of making him mistreat people around him and just be really rude and cruel. So that was definitely the hardest, to step out of my personality and get into this character's head.
Now, did you find in the struggle you had putting that one together that character ended up kind of shining more than other ones did?
Yeah, he really took on a lot more depth, even though it was difficult for me to get into his head. And in the second book, which has just gone out to beta readers, he's a point of view character with a lot more of a role than he did in the first book. And there's no way that would have happened if I hadn't really forced myself to get into his head in the first book.
That actually you bring up a interesting thing. As far as changing point of view between characters, how do you tackle that? Is it like a per chapter thing, or how is it that you put that together?
It is a per chapter thing. So what I used to write is I would just do like a paragraph break, and in one chapter I would pull a Robert Jordan and have three different people with a point of view. But I found that that really confused readers and threw them off, and so they want a hard chapter break. So I write very short chapters, usually only 4 or 5 pages, and each chapter is from the point of view of a different character, and you sort of get in the first paragraph whose point of view that is.
That's interesting. That's good, man. Um, it seemed like when you were telling us about like the Sphinx and stuff like that, that you've done a lot of research about the stuff you're writing about in this book. How much research did you actually have to do to put all this together?
Oh, hundreds of hours. Here's the thing, though. It wasn't like, oh, God, I've got to approach this amount of work. I'm interested in these things. So I picked up a bunch of books on Egypt, and I picked up a bunch of books and audiobooks on the Cro-Magnon because that was important to the background as well, and on neuroscience and other things that I was interested in. And so it took a long time to work through all those things, but I kept finding really interesting facts. Like, for example, canine DNA is the most malleable DNA of any mammal, and I found this in a documentary on dogs on Netflix. So, if we were ever going to pick a creature that would be most likely to be able to shift into a werewolf, it would actually be a wolf, which I thought was really fascinating. So, it was fun doing a lot of this research. So, despite the fact that it took me, a couple hundred hours, I consider it time well spent.
That's awesome. Now, in your book, are the werewolves more men that turn into wolves, or are they more wolves that turn into man-like creatures?
They are men that turn into half men, half wolves. So think your traditional large werewolf creature. It looks basically bipedal, but it's got claws and fur and the whole 9 yards. Later on in the series, they figure out that they can turn into full wolves, but initially, you're just seeing your traditional werewolf-like creature.
Are the wolves wearing pants?
The wolves do not typically wear pants. This is addressed in the book, and I have a lot of funny scenes based on this because, you think about it, when you get control over the ability to shift into a werewolf, if you become a lot larger than you were as a person, your pants just got shredded. They're going to burst at the seams, and so that happens frequently. So the werewolves almost always end up naked after shifting, and it's not until late in book 2 that they finally figure out there's a way for them to shift and not lose their clothing. But up until that point, every time they're getting into a fight, they come out of it naked.
Are you familiar with Monster Squad?
I am.
That whole debate the children were having about if Wolfman has nards or not, and they say that he must because he wears pants. Good stuff, man.
Yeah.
One of Zoe's clinchers is, do the werewolves have clothes? Or is it something like they're ripping out of them, or do they just turn into like giant wolves? Like, do you remember Brotherhood of the Wolf?
I do.
Do you remember that one? That
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm not 100%, but I think that was like one of the first movies that kind of brought the werewolves back into
Yeah, they were
cinema,
like a dead
kind
genre
of
for a
thing.
while. It was one of the first ones.
Yeah, and it was very the CG on it was very awkward, but it was still new at the time, I think. But yeah, that was just some rabbit trail stuff there for you. So, what is your favorite all-time werewolf film?
Film, you said?
Yeah, let's go with film first here.
Okay, favorite film. Wow, that's challenging because there's a lot of really, really good werewolf movies. I would probably have to go with Silver Bullet, and that's just going to be from nostalgia. Just being
Yeah.
so terrified as a kid, where your main character in this movie was the same age I was when I saw the movie. It was like a 10-year-old and didn't know who the werewolf was, but did know the werewolf was murdering people. And so there's this one scene where the adults go out and try and hunt it down because they think it's a wolf, and there's like this waist-high mist, and they're just getting picked off by the werewolf. And so, 4 or 5 people's parents get killed. It was just, surreal. Loved it. So that's probably my favorite, but there's a lot of others that I love.
Okay, so let's do a who would you rather hear? Uh, the Howling 2, Your Sister's a Werewolf, or Ginger Snaps?
Wow, that is tough. I'm gonna go with Ginger Snaps just because I'm kind of cruel.
Oh, no, that's cool. That was just a silly thing. Oh, here's one. Um, is an American werewolf better off in London or Paris?
I'm gonna go with London on that one.
That is a very astute judgment on your part, sir. Um, yeah, Paris was sad, but
Yeah, sad
anyway.
and disappointing because I had such high hopes.
Yeah, man. Okay. What do you think is the most common problem you see in kind of werewolf lore as it is modernized?
Twilight, without a doubt, Twilight.
And what did they? So the thing they did wrong with the werewolves was what exactly?
They neutered them, so they made them a bunch of, buffed, shirtless guys that can't even turn into a real werewolf. They can only turn into a wolf and then be pet by Kristen Stewart. And they weren't violent. They weren't animalistic in any way. They were like dogs, and that made me sad.
I don't know if you ever saw it, but there's this classic film called Night of the Living Fred.
I have
Fred
not.
Part Two. And there's this awesome scene, and I'll try to find a GIF and put it in the comments or something on this. But they like are kind of redoing one of those scenes from Twilight, and Fred comes out all buff and everything, and then he jumps and he turns into a little Pomeranian.
Okay, I'm
And
sold.
like, it was just the oh man, it cracked me up. But anyway, so first arc, that's kind of like your intro prequel kind of thing into um, No Such Thing as Werewolves, and this takes place a long time before. And the way the cover looks, to me at least, it has more of a kind of fantasy element to it. Is that accurate?
I
I'm
can see how the
guessing
cover
that.
would really give you that impression. So the first arc is about the figures that were responsible for inspiring the Egyptian gods. So anybody who's familiar with Egyptian lore, you've heard of Osiris, you've heard of Isis, you've heard of Set. These are the characters that I used in this prequel novella, and it's about this character Isis, the mother, discovering the first ark. So there's multiple pyramids, and they don't know who built them. They're far older than mankind, scattered across the world, and they're finding one of them. And so they have no choice but to flee inside, and they get inside and they learn a little bit more about who built these pyramids. And it totally changes their view of the world and also is responsible for creating the virus that will ultimately lead to werewolves.
Now, is that a like a short story, or is that a full book?
I
Or
call it a novella, but yeah, it's a short story. The audiobook is an hour and a half long, whereas the novel is 14 hours, if that gives you any idea of the difference in size.
oh, the audio book for the werewolf book,
Right,
the
so the
actual.
audio werewolf book is 14 hours, and the first arc audiobook is an hour and a half, so it's way, way shorter.
Now, in your audio book, is it just someone reading?
It is, but it is literally the best narrator in the world. Not that I'm biased. He does accents and voices incredibly well, and the
Yeah.
number one voice that everybody loves, and I get emails about this every single day, is the Beast. So when you shift into a werewolf in my world, you have a racial memory, sort of like a consciousness in your head that will teach you things, and that's referred to in werewolves as the Beast. And the way he does the voice of the Beast is incredible.
That is awesome. So 14 hours of an audiobook, man, that's class right there, dude.
Yeah, it's selling like
That's worth
hotcakes
it.
too. Thank you so
I
much to
bet.
anybody who's listening to this and has bought it.
And that's just on Audible, right? Is that the only
Audible and
place
iTunes.
iTunes? Cool. So the next book that's coming out in April is called No Mere Zombie. Is that
Right,
correct?
which the big spoilers right there in the title, as far as who the ancient enemy is.
So, and then the last book in the series is Vampires Don't Sparkle.
Yes, that's me taking a swipe right at
So
Twilight.
You have. I'm sorry.
That's me taking a swipe at Twilight.
So there are going to be zombies and going to be vampires in this series. Yes.
Yeah, so I thought, on the surface, if you were to hear that, you'd think that's absurd. How are you going to mix werewolves and zombies and vampires and make that not be stupid? And so my whole goal in this trilogy is to make it really work. So by the time you're done reading this, you're like, oh my God, that made complete sense, and it's awesome that all three of these supernatural predators are in the same series. So I have a
Right on.
scientific reason why all three exist.
And the next book comes out in April. So I was going to ask you, how do your deadlines work? How do you self-impose deadlines to put all your stuff together? And I have your dates set.
I get a lot of fan assistance in the form of death threats that if I don't have the next book out by a certain date, it's going to end badly for me. So there's that as motivation. But what I do is I set myself a word count goal every single day, and I hit it. I make sure that I hit it. So I write for an hour, exactly an hour, every morning when I get home from the gym, and I crank out between 2,000 and 3,000 words. And then on the weekend, I'll spend some time editing, and then if I'm inspired to write a little bit more, I'll pump out some more words on the weekend. And so I typically crank out 50,000 words a month. So it'll take me 2 months to put a manuscript together, and then maybe another month or two to rewrite and edit, depending on how much work it needs.
Right on. And so the second book you said is actually with your readers right now.
Yeah, the first 10 or 12 of them I've already finished it, and I've gotten the initial feedback, and they really like the direction that I've taken. So that'll be out pretty soon.
That's awesome, man. And you work with a lot of people in putting your stuff together, correct?
I do. I have a very large team that I work with. So my day
Can you
job, I work
explain
at
how
a
that
startup,
works?
and as anybody who works at a startup knows, you're at that for 10, 12 hours every day, holidays, weekends. You're working a lot. So anything I can outsource to somebody else, I do. I have everything from a virtual assistant to an author assistant to multiple editors and any other help that I can get, such as beta readers.
That's awesome, man. And do you find doing it this way, nothing ever gets confusing with that many people?
I'm really good at
Do you have like a
organized
project
systems.
manager?
I'm sorry?
Do you have like a project manager or anything like that?
I guess I would be the project manager. So I like that because while it takes a little bit of management on my part, it forces me to stay accountable. So I don't get to take a day off and say I don't feel like writing today because I have to turn over chapters to an editor and I have to, get in contact with my author assistant about setting up marketing. And so the fact that I have to hand out these tasks to them on a regular basis keeps me accountable. And then also being able to delegate work makes it possible for me to get this done as one person.
That's awesome, man. So when the last book is done and out in October, are you going to continue on with this series, or do you have other plans?
I am. I'm going to keep that series going. So I have the fourth book already planned. It's called The Great Pack. And then I'm also working on a second series set in the same universe. And the first book in that series is called The Truth About Aliens. It's a Silicon Valley thriller. So think X-Files in Silicon Valley.
Nice. And when is that supposed to be ready to go?
I don't have a definite release date, but I'm aiming for probably March or April of 2016 for that first book in the new series.
That's awesome, man. I love having dates for stuff. Even if I miss them by a little bit, just the idea of knowing that something's coming really gets me going here. So people can find the books on Amazon. Now, are they on all the platforms?
Right now, the audiobook is spread a little bit wider, but the ebook and the paper book are only available on Amazon. So for those that don't know, you enter into a 90-day term with Amazon, and when my next one is up, I'm going to pull them and go wide. So they'll be available on Kobo, Nook, and Apple as well.
Nice. And where can people find you?
I am at chrisfoxwrites.com. Or, and I'm very proud of this, if you type in Chris Fox Werewolves, I'm the first thing to come up on Google.
That's rad. Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much. man, and I'll put some stuff in the notes here so people can get in touch with you. That was awesome.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
great. Thanks for having me on. I enjoyed it.
No problem, man. Take it easy.
All right, take care.
All right.